Welcome to the Blind Apex Podcast, where amateur club racers tune in to get faster.
If you want to support the podcast, please share, download, review, and give the podcast a 5-star rating on your preferred podcast platform. This episode is brought to you by Deechworks Fuel Systems. Visit deechworks.com for all your fuel system needs. On this episode of the Blind Apex Podcast, we're going to dive into hood louvers and fender louvers. As always, I'm your host, Con John Turk. Joining me, military veteran, former American Iron racer, and I really wish you'd get back to that because I think that class they're exciting. Aerodynamic consultant, owner, operator of RaceLouvers.com. Albert Watson, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. Appreciate the invite.
Anytime. You are part of the trifecta that I know of. Maybe the quadruplets if you throw Johnny in the mix, but talking to Mario, talking to AJ, they're always like, you got to talk to Albert. So I reached out after the wind tunnel trip because I need louver work, but I want to understand it. And I think it's a misunderstood topic by a lot of people. It was probably misunderstood by me, at least a little bit, if not a medium amount. So I thought we would sit down and talk. So thanks for coming on.
You're welcome. I appreciate it.
So I hinted to the world that you used to race American Iron, but how did you get into this racing, club racing, and then into the louver game?
Well, I was pretty much kind of a car guy since high school. I got my first Mustang while I was in the service, Navy. And that's where it started, as most people do. The usual bolt-on street stuff, go to the drag strip occasionally, all that fun stuff. And then, I guess it was maybe 2001, something like that, 2002. A friend of mine, David Pizzotti, introduced me to the world of road course racing, specifically an HPDE event. And after attending one of those, I think it took me about 2 months to strip down the pseudo street drag Mustang and throw all the road course suspension stuff and all that fun stuff in it. And then that was it for me. And it's been full tilt on the road course thing for quite a few decades. And that's kind of where it really sunk in for me as far as racing, cars, parts, knowledge, that kind of thing.
I didn't want to ask you what year Mustang you got, so I didn't want to date you, So we'll just leave it. They were pretty much the same Mustang for a decade, 2 decades, over 2 decades, sort of.
Well, my first Mustang was an '89 GT,
okay,
mostly stock, and then did a few things to that. But then I got a '93 LX, and then that thing was sort of turned into a drag car. Drag suspension, supercharged, run low 10s and a quarter, that fun stuff. And then when I got hooked on the road racing thing, I completely stripped that chassis, sold everything, and started with that chassis as my first, quote, road racing type car. I guess I had that for a few years, and then like most people, I guess, you wind up cutting up, modifying your car to some point where it just gets ugly. Too much nonsense. So anyways, so yeah, I guess it was 2000, I don't know, 2006, 7, I forgot the year. I bought a 93 notchback Mustang Roller, and that car, I got an auto body chassis rotisserie, and that
Hmm.
car we stripped to a complete shell, and we just made race car from ground up. There was no street, nothing. Like, it was just start with a shell, and it's going to be a race car, and that's it. And that's a car that I've used for quite a while. Still have it. Still runs good. Um, but yeah, so three versions of the Mustang. Fun stuff.
Do you still have the rotisserie?
I do not. I borrowed that. Who did I borrow that from? I borrowed that from a friend of a friend. I don't even remember. But no, I had to give it back. That thing was mint. I gotta say, that made working on a car a dream. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just when you can stand there and rotate the car and you are staring at the bottom of the car and you're just welding on subframe connectors and doing roll cages while you're standing vertically without crawling underneath anything. And it comes out so much better and so much easier, and it's more enjoyable, I guess.
Yeah, they always say you make friends when you have a lift and when you have a trailer, but you would make real friends if you had a rotisserie.
I Yeah, I gotta say that is yeah, something you don't use often, but well worth it if you can somehow get yourself one of those.
For sure, for sure. I'm actually jealous. I mean, not just, I've had my car for a couple of years, but when I was building my car, I was like, man, can I build one of those poor man rotisseries out of wood that, I just rock it. And so, we rock it up on its side and then rock it the other way. And I didn't do it that way. Let's just say that. And I don't like being on the ground anymore. So it had to
That's
make it
true.
easy.
I guess we're not 18 anymore.
No, I'm not 18 anymore. So was it cutting up that second Mustang? Is that how you got into Louvers?
No, so yeah, we cut up that Mustang, turned it into a road course car. Um, I did a few things. Shout out to NASA Northeast. I got involved with them, um, and started doing the HPDE, and that didn't last long before I was wheel to wheel racing it, um, and then yeah, so we had it a few years racing it, and then as anybody does, you want to go faster. What do you do? What am I going to get next? That kind of thing. I started looking into louvers, and being so this is an interesting part that I think a lot of the audience should take away. Um, when you're young, 18, 20, whatever, you're new at the car thing. You don't know too much, but you're trying like heck. And I guess as you get older and more experienced, your how you think and progress as to what to do to car and all that changes because you got more knowledge, all that stuff. So when I got into the louver business, I had this particular car, and I guess I was looking to buy my first set of louvers. I'm like, all right, I did this, and this to the car, and what do I need? And so I was looking at some louvers and looking at a couple of different companies that sells them, and I'm like, okay, being a racer with some knowledge and some background, I've been doing it a while. You start to ask those questions, like, well, what size louver do I need? Does it really work? What does it do? Which ones are better? Why is this one better? What is this one? Those kind of questions. And that led me into the fact that nobody that I've seen at the time had any kind of data on any testing of any louvers other than the traditional cough cough magna helical gauge and a tube routine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that's what got me, thinking about it. I was trying to find one that works. Why does it work? Testing. You look for the data. When you start um, going down that path. And so I didn't see any. And so I guess at the time, my good friend, best friend, Dave Pizzotti, he's a mechanical engineer. He was just like, well, let's build our own. And I said, okay. He's like, well, design it. He'll design it. We'll throw it on some CAD, get some files, have it laser cut, and then you can be done. And I'm like, all right, that sounds good. So we start doing that. And then I'm like, I'm still at the question of, well, what kind of louver does it have to be? How big does it got to be? What does it got to look like? What, how am I going to know that even the stuff that I'm going to make is going to work? So that got me into a good question as to, all right, now I'm going to have to start figuring out how to test these things and figure out how to make something that's actually going to sort of work and not just buy something with the usual reduces, lift, adds cooling claims that you see from everywhere else.
Right.
So at that point, I started to use some of my backgrounds. I used to work at the Brookhaven National Laboratory on the Collider project. And so we did a lot of, I guess, laboratory type testing, R&D. There was a kind of a way of doing things when I used to work in that area. And so I started out with a hood on my, this is crazy. I'm not sure anybody knows this. My 2005 Nissan Altima daily driver that I'm lugging my kids around in is where it really started. So in order to make these louvers for my race car, I had to figure out what worked and how it worked and all that fun stuff. So I bought a hood from a salvage company and started literally making louvers with, raw metal in the garage, that kind of thing. And what I quickly learned is that the instrumentation, to try to figure out what works and what doesn't work was just as much of a project. Because in order to figure out what worked and didn't work without actually going to the wind tunnel initially, we had to somehow, in my work, establish airflow through the radiator. And how are you going to measure that? How it's going to be reliable, repeatable, and establishing test procedures. Like, how are you going to test this? What are you going to use? And then from there, once we got that sorted out, I literally started making tacked together with a MIG welder louvers, and I document shape, size, this, that, and the other thing, stick it on the car, drive down the highway at highway speeds, pull data, and then go back, analyze it, make another one, highway, analyze the data, go back, make another one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. By the end of that, I think I don't even want to know how many hoods we had behind the garage from testing all this business, and how many scrap louvers that, we wound up getting rid of when the metal guy came. And that guy probably had a good day because we had a lot of stuff for him. But right. That's really where it was born. That's where it really was born. And so through all of that, we came up with, I came up with, some test parts. And that's when we went down to the wind tunnel and actually stuck it in there with much better, data acquisition and stuff like that. And then from there, we started out with our RS Street, RT Track, and RX Extreme louver kits for the hoods. So that's really where it was born. And so I guess that's about the shortest version.
Yeah. You had to start somewhere, and I applaud you for starting with something, right? And then seeking data on it, right? You weren't like, oh, this under this hood, there's a certain shape, and I'm going to cut it to this shape and put some fins in it, right? Or I see a lot of that. Literally, the hood louver I have on my car it's used for a factory 5 car. And I had it on my first race car and it seemed to do okay. It helped with cooling at least. That was easily measurable for me. And so I slapped it on the next car that I built. 2 totally different cars, mind you. But I was like, well, this is where the pressure zone is on my hood. So that's where I'm going to do it. And it fit.
Well, yeah, I was going to comment on that because I think this would be something for the audience, some good information is the whole pressure zone, pressures, magnehelical gauge. Like, this is something you see on the internet all over the place, and it's both good and not so good.
Mm-hmm.
So the first issue is the instrumentation itself. Let's just go there for a second. So you have a pressure gauge. It could be, a magnehelical gauge. It could be a manometer. It could be a digital manometer. That's your gauge. And then you need a probe. And the tricky part, the one part that's nobody seems to understand, I think, is that when you have a manometer or a magnehelical gauge and a tube, just a tube, that is designed for measuring pressure in a system that has no airflow. As soon as the air starts to move, then you need a different probe or mechanism to actually sense the pressure. So the tube is just no good. It could be used. People do use it. I've used it, but it's very inaccurate. And to elaborate a little bit, if you look at any race car, like any professional race car on TV from Formula One down to IMSA, they all have a pitot tube on the tops of the cars. And if you quickly Google pitot tube and you come up with a picture, you're going to see a tube that essentially points exactly in the direction of airflow over the car. There's a hole at the very tip for the pressure. And then about halfway along the tube itself, there are tiny holes that sense the pressure of the air as the air flows over those holes. That is an extremely effective, accurate way to actually measure air pressure when the air is actually moving. All the aircrafts use these things, this, that, and the other thing. So the tube in the magnehelical gauge is not such a good thing. In one of our hoods that we did in testing, I literally drilled a couple hundred holes in the surface of the hood so that you can hook up a tube to the underside of the hood so that the air flowing over the hood would flow over these tiny holes just like a pitot tube, and then you can get really good, data points along the hood, everywhere on the hood. But nobody's going to do that. Everybody just wants to slap a tube on their hood and tape it on there. The problem is if the air flows exactly over the edge of the tube at a 90-degree angle, it's going to be reasonably accurate. But you're still going to get some turbulence because the air is hitting the tube itself. And then if the angle changes ever so slightly, it has a pretty good effect on, the reading. So I don't know. Anyways, so to go a little bit further with that, I think too many people believe that if you find the low pressure area on your hood, that's where your louver should go. And while that's a good thought, the problem really is not the problem, but really what you're trying to do is you're trying to move air in and out of your radiator core, your heat exchangers. So
Okay.
if you're low, so if you and people, I think people realize this after they do all these kind of tests, and they should do all these tests. These tests are generally free or really cheap, and it's just a fun kind of hobby thing to do. My only take is don't cut up your car based on that necessarily, because a lot of times the lower pressure air is generally found at the front of the hood. The hood's got a
Hmm.
curve to it at the leading edge. It's pretty far away from the cowl area where there's high pressure. So generally the front of the hood's always going to be generally the lowest pressure area. The problem is the radiator is generally behind that. So you're not going to put a louver on well, you shouldn't put a louver on your hood where the louver is in front of the radiator,
Hmm.
because then you have the whole potential of sucking out all the high pressure air in front of the radiator, which is, has, negative effects. But so, so yeah, the whole pressure thing on a hood and measuring it and all that business. I mean, it's good, it's fun, it's educational, for sure. Take it with a grain of salt. And then the reality is you got to put a louver. Like if you're trying to get air in and out of your radiator, then the louver's got to go behind the radiator. I mean, that's just where it's got to go. And, once if you have a factory car where the radiator's in a factory location, 90 degrees vertical, you know, then you're going to put your louver right behind it. A lot of cars, we see a lot of people, installing radiators at an angle where they tilt the front in so that the back of the radiator is angled up and out. So then your louver can go further forward on the hood if that's the case. But I think a good takeaway is the louver should always be behind the radiator, because that's what you're really doing, is you're trying to suck air out of the radiator while the front of your grill opening is trying to force it through. So there's that.
No, I agree. I looked at. I think there's 3 or 4 folks with my generation Honda Civic that did the test with one of the device. They had a broomstick and a tube, and they were putting it out on a 6x6 square tape off job on their hood. And they all did it this way, and they were measuring, and they all got the same measurements, and they didn't do it all together. So they got very, very similar measurements, I should say. So I was pretty confident at that level. I knew it can't be that scientific, right? I mean, it's scientific in process, but
Right.
you have left to right wind shift. There's a lot of variables, but when everybody came back with sort of the same data, I was like, okay, I'm okay with where I'm about to put this. And it's behind the radiator, because that's where, I knew that's where it should be. But
Right.
you're
Yep.
right.
The other thing that people sort of lose sight of when they're doing this whole pressure measuring business is that gauges, particularly magnehelical manometers, pressure type gauges, always have a reference pressure. So for example, a digital manometer has a high-low, 2-port pressure meter. So when you're measuring pressure on pretty much anything relatively, there is always a reference. Like if you have an oil pressure gauge in your car, the reference for that oil pressure gauge is atmospheric. Okay. And so it's going to measure a pressure between 2 points, if you will, not just one. A lot of people I'm not sure they think about this. So I guess where I'm leading to this is, magnehelical gauge. I believe most of them are 1-ports, but even if it's a 1-port or a 2-port, if it's a 1-port, there's always a hole in the back of the gauge itself that senses atmospheric.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're driving your car and you have this gauge, right? You have your tube that's on the hood, and you've got it strung in the window, and you're let's let's be smart. You got somebody else driving the car for you. You're sitting in the passenger seat and you're measuring with this gauge in your hand. You're writing stuff down or whatever. The reference for your pressures on that hood that you're trying to measure is the cockpit pressure, because it's sensing it. So if you have a single port gauge, it's sensing the pressure within the driver's compartment. If you have a 2-port gauge and you just have one of the ports open because you're only using one tube out on the top of the hood, then you're using the driver's compartment pressure. And the driver's compartment pressure, this is where it really gets interesting. The pressure in the driver's compartment will change if the window's up, window's down, you're going fast, you're going slow. Like it's variable. So it throws a whole nother wrench in the whole, I'm going to measure the pressures on my hood. So the way we do it, right, if the crowd wants to get a little bit better at this, is you need to have a 2-port manometer, and one of those ports has to be in the engine bay, because really what you're trying to do is you're trying to measure the difference in pressure between the top and the bottom of the hood. Like, I guess if you get into the whole, aero cooling downforce, but you don't want your reference pressure to be the driver's compartment, because that's variable, windows up, windows down, whatever.
Right.
In the race car world, you use the pitot tube, and you use the reference pressure on the pitot tube to sense the natural pressure around the car. So that's where things get really crazy. So, but even so, I think the takeaway, is that's all nice and good, but yeah, Louvers should always be behind the radiator.
So we hinted at this a little bit. You just started talking about it. I wanted to get into the basics of Louvers and what their actual intention is.
Well, their intention, so that it depends on how you look at it. So the main purpose of a louver, in our opinion, is cooling and downforce. Cooling primarily, with downforce being, or reduced lift, depending on semantics. Those are the two main things. So what you're trying to do, so I'm going to break out louvers into two kinds. I'm going to break them out into a vent and an extractor. So when you have a vent, just in general terms, forget the car business, whatever, just the word vent. A vent is something that just allows pressure to flow from a high area to a low area, right? It's a simple little thing. It allows pressure to equalize or flow from one area to the other. That's a vent. An extractor is a vent that actually further sucks out the air, if you will. I'm not sure exactly how to say that properly, but so you have a vent on a car. Generally, anything that's flush mount is a vent. I mean, it just vents from a high pressure area to low pressure area. And an extractor is a vent as well, but it's designed where it creates more low pressure and can pull or extract more air or cause more airflow from one cavity to another. So those are the kind of two scenarios. So the purpose of a vent or an extractor is to pull air from the backside of the radiator to improve the flow through it. So, heat exchangers are a big fancy metal doodad to dissipate heat. And, there's a whole design that goes into those. But those are highly, those heat exchangers, need airflow in order to function. So a simple and easy way to get your heat exchangers to work better is just to improve the airflow through it. A number of ways to do that. So generally, louvers are there for improved cooling by trying to induce more airflow through the heat exchangers, make them work better.
Mm-hmm.
The side benefit to that is reduced lift slash front downforce. And that's something a vent typically has little impact on, where an extractor has a much larger impact on. But cooling is generally the thing. It depends on where the car is in its stage of life. If somebody has built a car and they're racing it and it runs good and it's not overheating and it runs good temperatures and they want to get some louvers, then they're probably looking to get louvers to improve, the front downforce, reduce lift, that kind of thing. And then you have the most common thing that we see is cars just running hot. They get heat soaked. These modern cars are crazy these days with everything so compact into the tiniest little box.
For sure.
And so cooling is by far the most use that we see these for, because it's really, you pay a lot of money to go to a track event, costs a lot of money, rent these tracks, insure them, all that staff, all that fun stuff. So it's really expensive to do track events, and the last thing you want to do, and we see this all the time, people go out there, they'll run like 2 or 3 laps and their stuff's overheat, and then they just literally got to come in because they don't want to risk, breaking their stuff. And so, it's no fun when you got a 30-minute session and you're only out there for 5 minutes or whatever that might be. So cooling is by far the most use that we see for these primarily.
Okay. I mean, that's where I started my journey with the hood louver, was to optimize. I have a really compact bay. I have a 2007 Civic, and everything's crammed in there.
So it's a transverse motor, right?
Right. It's front wheel drive. So the transmission's in there, like in the engine bay. The engine's in there, intake manifold, header. Most of the header's still in the engine bay because it waterfalls off the back of the engine, and the collector is basically just outside the engine bay. But
right.
Most of the runners are in there. And it's just, it's putrid hot when I come off track. And I knew that was going to be a problem, even with my other car, which wasn't quite the same. But the entire header it's a B series car, was a B series car. So that header, the entire header, and some of the exhaust is still in the engine bay, right? Wraps underneath my oil pan. So I knew I was going to need to cool that engine down. So I went with, this louver setup. Apparently it's more of a vent probably for me, but you could definitely grill stuff on there. I mean, if there's a session around lunchtime and I come off the track and you threw burgers on my hood, it's going to cook them, right? Like it's pretty hot. So I was always trying to keep it cool. And now I'm trying to, we'll just call it optimize the car. So I need it cooler, and I need less drag, and I need more downforce. And so all that stuff hood louvers, fender louvers, we didn't really talk about what it does in the fender, but all of that aids in the cooling and the airflow, and therefore the reduce of lift and all that stuff. So when you're optimizing a car, you really should be looking at it, as far as I'm concerned.
Right, and there's a lot going on in a race car. And actually, I think something we've learned, when we started this whole journey, is that there's a lot more involved in a race car than just a lot cooling aspect. But so hood vents, so hood louvers used for cooling. The idea is get the hot air. So in order to induce airflow from one area to another, you need a pressure differential. There's got to be a high and a low, and air will move from one to the other. That's just the generals. So in the front of the car, most all production cars that we see, front radiator, front engine, front grille, they're using the high pressure on the nose of the car to force air into the radiator. And then normally it just goes swirling through the engine bay down at the bottom of the car, and that's that. So you could louvers, a vent will help, relieve some pressure, reduce some pressure, allow some airflow from the back of the radiator out. That helps it. An extractor where you can suck air out, actually lower the pressure, work much better. But then there's a whole drag cooling component to that. A vent is generally pretty low drag because they don't do too much other than allowing air to flow from high pressure to low pressure. When you start, when you start making louvers with gurney flaps and other things to try to lower the pressure and suck the air out, now you're introducing a whole drag component, and so there's a whole balance there of how much of this and that you can do. Otherwise, like just slapping a gurney flap on something may or may not work. I mean, we've done some tests on our website. You can look at it. We did a GT350 stock hood vent, relatively small. Put a little gurney flap on it. It didn't do anything but add drag. So it was like a complete bust. But then we had a pretty big, traditional louver vent, I guess, if you will. Put a gurney flap on it, just a raw gurney flap sitting on there. And then it starts to work a little bit better. The drag is not so crazy. It has a little bit of improvement. But then, so that's the dilemma with extractors. If you have a vent where you don't have the gurney flap, they're kind of, they can't go wrong too much. But if you just slap a gurney flap on a vent, you got the potential to add a lot of drag to your car and not necessarily gain any cooling or downforce. So that's where it gets a little tricky. We've seen people try a bunch of stuff and it works. I mean, you could stick tufts on it and stuff like that. But I think the problem is you don't know. And that's, so you could stick a gurney on your vent on your car. You could just slap a gurney flap on that thing, and you can slap some tufts on it, and you can be like, "Oh, they're standing straight up. Oh, it's working great, awesome." But then you might take it to the wind tunnel and be like, "Holy cow, this thing's making 10 pounds of drag." The problem is you don't know what it's doing. You don't know how the downforce or reduced lift was changed. You don't know if the differential pressure across the radiator is actually changed. You don't even know if the drag has changed. So that's the dilemma with playing around with stuff like that without testing to some extent.
Well, I definitely didn't test that at the wind tunnel, and I definitely have a gurney flap on my setup. So
Right.
maybe next time, because I'm definitely going back. So we'll see.
Right. So, yeah, to continue on the whole louver business, louvers, whether vents or extractors, size matters, square inches matters, and that comes with the caveat that generally bigger is better, size-wise, as long as the louver is behind the radiator and it's not too close to the high pressure zone at the base of the windshield. So that's kind of your go area for a louver. And if you have like a really, really, really long paragraph on the RaceLouvers website, in the data section, there's a tech tips PDF where I think it's a really long paragraph that describes the pressure relation between the bottom of the hood and the top of the hood, and where what we call the zero differential pressure point on the hood. So let's say you got a hood with no vent, and you can accurately measure the pressure underneath the hood and on top of the hood, right? And there's going to be a point on the hood close to the cowl where the pressure on top and the pressure on the bottom is going to be the same. And then at that point, there'll be no flow one way or the other. And then if you get too close to the cowl, the pressure on top gets higher than the pressure underneath. And then you get reverse flow and the air goes from the top of the cowl into the engine bay, which is counterproductive.
Right.
So when you add a louver vent or extractor, you're essentially lowering the pressure in the engine bay. And then your pressure between the top and the bottom now, that zero pressure point where it's zero top to bottom, moves forward on the hood. So I guess what I'm getting at is the better extraction, the better airflow out of the louvers that you get, the further forward this this zero differential pressure top bottom of the hood is going to be, which dictates the length of the louver. Then you can't, as the louver gets better, the louver has to be shorter. Right?
Okay.
Right. So there's a whole paragraph on our website about that in that tech.
Oh, it's long. I'm
it's
looking
long.
at
I'm not going to go. Yeah, everybody can go on that later and read it and kind of digest that. But
yeah,
I guess
it's worth
the
a
point
read.
the point is, wider louvers are definitely better. There's some diminishing returns, the bigger it gets, but generally wider is better. But the length is, the length is longer is not better. The right size is better, and it depends on the car. Like your car has a relatively short hood compared to other cars, like a Mustang. Mustang's got a pool table for a hood.
Right.
So your louver would have to be shorter than ones that can go on hoods with longer hoods.
Yeah, I think the current one I have is 24 by 8 or so.
8, yeah, 24 wide, 8 long.
Yep.
Right, yeah. Yep, 8 front to back. Yeah, that's actually kind of small, but okay. So that's what, 200 square inches?
Yeah, I got hood pins that got in the way, so it sort of lives
and
in between hood pins.
That's race car compromise. Series of compromises to achieve a goal, right?
Right. I'm looking at. I looked on your website. The side ones seem to go longer. All of the ones that are deemed the side louvers are pretty long, and I don't think I can do that. So on my short hood.
Right. Yeah. Well, you could, but you can't run your 24 wide by 8 kit in the middle. You'd have to shrink that up. So the reason why you'll see this on our website a lot, the reason why the center hood kits are shorter than the sides is because of that high pressure cowl area at the base of the windshield. So if you can imagine for a second, you're looking at a top view picture of your car, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the high pressure zone at the base of the windshield in the center of the hood extends pretty far forward. But as you get outboard left and right sides towards the A-pillars, the high pressure, the distance front to back is a lot less. It's kind of like a U shape, if you will, if I can just make it as simple as possible. If you were to draw a U from your left A pillar, extend forward in the middle and then back to the B pillar, that's kind of where your high pressure zone is, so to speak. And so that dictates you to a certain size length in the middle, depending on the car. But that allows you to have slightly longer kits on the side. And then the back of those kits, being a little bit longer, won't get into that high pressure area because the high pressure area is not completely a flat line across the windshield. It's not like that. So that's why you generally see, longer ones on the sides than you do in the middle.
Yeah, we noticed that on my car in the wind tunnel, that in the left and right far sides of the hood, didn't have the tufts weren't acting the same as they were more to the upper center of the hood, center windshield area. So,
right. Yep.
Yeah. So again, there's some trial and error. So with this, especially if you're not going to spend the money, go to the wind tunnel. I know you guys have done wind tunnel testing. I know you guys have done some CFD work. I'm sure you're marrying the two. I'm sure you're doing track testing of the efficiencies of things. But so you have kits for all sorts of vehicles right now. Are those mostly best practices used to build those kits, or are you guys really working the data to get those kits together?
Kind of both. Yeah, we do have a lot of different options for a lot of different cars. And a lot of cars can take a different louver or a different setup. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we just pick the ones that are gonna work the best, so to speak. But like your car, for example, you've got the big wide but short kit. That's one approach. You can shorten up that kit to maybe 18 inches wide and then add some side kits on it. That's another option. So I think, right. So I think a keep it simple, stupid takeaway would be bigger is better. Behind the radiator, not too close to the high pressure zone at the base of the windshield. And it's really square inches. So we tell we two things that generally affect the functionality of louvers and extractors: the physical size, square inch wise, length times width, just how big it is. The physical size of the louver will improve cooling and downforce at all speeds. If the car is sitting there in impound and the thing's roasting red hot, the more louvers you got, the bigger the area, the quicker it's going to cool down. And then also when you're doing 100 on the track or whatever, that bigger square inch louver situation is also going to work better. Now you throw into it our different performance trims. We have like a street version, track, and extreme. And, main difference is how tall they are, from the hood surface. Those further improved louver functionality when the car is at, higher speeds. So those are the two aspects. So yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because I believe the rules influenced the development of some of those kits, right? I know in Honda Challenge we don't have a height restriction for how tall our louvers can be, but there's other classes that do that, and so you guys designate that stuff on the website, right?
Yeah, we try to keep up with most of the rule sets that we can. We actually make specific parts for Grid Life and NASA, ST, and all those different rule sets. There's actually a section right on our website for rule specific louvers. But yeah, a lot of different organizations have a lot of different rules. Some are funny, some are pretty good, some are open-ended. I don't know, but yeah, a lot of different rules out there for places.
Yeah. The ST rules require a shorter louver, correct?
The ST rules limit the height to 3/8 of an inch. Now this would be ST 3 to 6, ST 3 if you're taking the BTM modifier.
Okay.
So yeah, essentially ST 4 to 6. Yeah, they limit the height, but then they don't limit the physical size. So the easy workaround is you just get a bigger louver.
Right.
So right. yeah, that's one of them, and that does have a reasonable effect on kind of controlling things. But there's always ways around things and ways to improve things beyond that. But yeah, so they have that. I know SCCA has, I want to say T2, T3, STU. They have like a 200 square inch rule. Yeah, a lot of different. We try to keep up with them, but yeah, there's so many racing series out there with so many rule sets. It's hard to keep track. But yep, we
And
try to make them for all those.
yeah, and misconceptions that are found in all the rule sets. I feel like not everybody's perfect. So
No, and so backtrack a half a second.
Mhm.
So not only was NASA American Iron Racer, but I'm the former NASA American Iron National Director. So been around the block a few with writing rules, and I guess where I was going with that is most of these organizations, Grid Life, NASA, whatever, SCCA, the guys that are writing the rules are just racers like you and I, and they just get into the position of having to write those rules, and then they're just regular people like us, and this is the usual thing going back to first started racing cars ever, is that you got the guys writing the rules, and then you got the guys that are building to the rules, and then so there's a whole gray area on how the rule is written and how it's interpreted. So some good rules, some really vague rules. I don't know, all the above, but yeah.
yeah, it's a challenge, and I appreciate our rules committee, even though sometimes I'm sure they don't think I appreciate them. It's a challenge and a daunting task. So I'm not knocking any of the rules committees. I just feel like if you
It
think
is.
there's
They
a
put a lot
change,
of time and energy
a
into
lot,
that. Yeah.
a lot, yeah, and they're not doing it. It's usually Adam Jabay would say it differently, but there's usually more. There's no dictatorship, right? Maybe in Grid Life it's more dictatorish, but and he would say that he's admitted to it before. But in other rules, it's a literal committee of individuals that have to sync their schedules together to work on sometimes pretty complicated stuff. But so just give them some slack and try to provide them as much information as you can to help educate them, because some of them may not know at all. And I know your website is full of data, full of information about Louvers. So if you need a louver request, I would go to RaceLouvers and see what the website has to offer to help educate your rules committee. I wanted to cover, I think we got into some of the ways to optimize your hood vents. Maybe not so much your fender louvers, but your that PDF that you were referencing earlier, it definitely says at least 2 inches behind the radiator. So the general rule of thumb, this is a quote, for RaceLouvers is 2 inches behind the radiator to 20 inches from glass in the center. So my hood is probably not even that big, but so placement there is really important. Are there any other ways to optimize hood and fender louvers? Is flush mount, top mount? How much does that play a role in things?
It plays a little bit of a role. So if you take our louvers for example,
Mm-hmm.
they're all designed to be top mount because the height of the blades and all that's been designed, tested, and you got data. And the moment you try to bottom mount it, then you're changing that height, I guess, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So that has a minor effect on it, minor. Um, but yeah, top mount is all of our stuff. It's just easy. We got a 1 inch mounting flange around the perimeter, so it doesn't take highly skilled person to install these. They're relatively easy, and our instructions are on our website. So if you want to read them before you order anything, or just read them because you want to read them for whatever reason. But yeah, optimizing a louver. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can do to optimize cooling besides louvers, and maybe we can get into that in a minute. Actually, we probably should, because I think there's some important things in there for people.
Okay.
But as far as the louver itself, you want to try to get as big of a louver as you can. And as far as the 2 inches, let's get back to that. That's actually an interesting thing. So we've done some testing, and we're going to assume for a second, because data is always based on this, that, and the other thing. So we're going to assume for a second that the front of the radiator is relatively boxed in, all the factory panels there, and so air can't really escape or get around. You really want the louver to be, the front of the louver to be right where the air comes out of that radiator. So if you got a race car and you got no fan, then you really want to mount it right there. 0.1 inch behind it, something like that. If you have a fan with a shroud, cough, cough, we'll talk about that in a minute, then you want to have the front of the louver where the air comes out of the fan assembly. And usually those fans vary in thickness. So our instructions generally say 2 to 4 inches behind the radiator, because that leaves a little room for different thickness fan assemblies and stuff like that. And it also leaves a little room for error on, the installer's part. And what I mean by that is that if you mount the louver in front of the radiator, you have a significant drop off in functionality once the front of the louver starts to get in front of the back of the radiator. Because the air is, as much as you'd like to think, the air is not going to do a 180-degree turn, travel forward on top of the core, and then get to the vent and go out, and it doesn't work. So, right. And so having a louver an inch or two in front of the back of the radiator has a pretty significant drop off in functionality. Whereas if the louver was 2, 3, 4, 5, even 6 inches behind the radiator core, then the drop off in functionality, we don't even see it until it's 5, 6 inches behind the radiator, and it kind of depends on the car and what's in the way. So louver install right behind the radiator. Like if you can really measure good, you want to optimize. You want to put that front of the louver right where the air is going to come out of the radiator itself. So that's that. But yeah, we say 2 to 4 inches. If somebody installs and it's 4 inches or 2 inches, it's negligible. So whereas if they installed it 2 inches in front of the radiator, they would have kind of stuck themselves a little bit.
Okay. Let's get into this optimization you said of the cooling, because you do sell a grill block off kit, and I think it's underutilized. So let's talk about the grill block off, and then how we're going to try to make the air flow and use the louvers.
So I think this is going to be one of my summary points at the end. The one of the most important things, if anybody would take away from this show, would be you need ducting in front of the radiator from the grill to the core. You need a good heat exchanger. You need a fan. We'll talk about this in a minute, with no shroud. And then you need some good heat extractors on the hood right behind the radiator. Like those are the ultimate basics. So as far as the ducting in front of the radiator to the grill. So any air that aerodynamically, you don't want any air going through the car, because the moment it goes through the chassis, there's the moment you start creating lift, a lot of drag, all that fun stuff. But unfortunately, you need some air to cool these things. So, how you manage that and make efficient use out of the air you're ingesting, can have a pretty good impact on your car's performance. So ducting, in the simplest terms, is a top, bottom, side panels, that connect the grill opening to the radiator core or heat exchanger, whatever you got in there, intercooler, whatever, oil coolers. And the whole purpose of that is so that any air that's ingested into the car has to go through these coolers, right? If the ducting's not good, and you took the panels out that come on the factory car because you're like, I don't need these, the air is just going to find the least path of resistance and go around, your heat exchangers. So ducting is critical. I mean, that's just, no brainer. A lot of new cars come with pretty decent paneling. I know race cars, people see this, they got the fancy curved aluminum ducts and all that fun stuff. Those are really good, but I think, any kind of top, bottom, side panels will get you like 90% there. But that's pretty important. Obviously, having a good heat exchanger that's clean, not full of debris, you should blow them out every now and again. That's the next thing. Got to have a good heat exchanger. And then you get into the whole fan shroud business. And there's some pretty good stuff on the data section of our website about this. Fan shrouds are really good for having air conditioning and cooling your car while you're at a traffic light. But they're god-awful horrendous at racetrack speeds. Essentially, you got a shroud. It dumbs down the physical size of your heat exchanger core into the size of the fan assembly. And in most cars, it usually cuts it down in half. So these become a real restriction to cooling and drag, actually, in racetrack speeds, 80, 100, whatever you're doing. Mm-hmm. So our real race cars, everything you see on TV, they don't have a fan because that's just, every last bit. But us real people, amateur guys, you kind of need something. So when the car is moving, you really don't need a fan. But when you're doing that 5 mile an hour crawl back to your paddock, your pits, you got to go to impound or something like that. It's you kind of need a fan. Right. And so we always recommend some kind of $99, simple 2-wire on-off 16, 18-inch slimline fan, keyword, no shroud. And you just slap it on the back of your thing. If you want to wire it to key on or wire it to a switch when you pull into pits, you just turn it on, whatever. That's kind of the best compromise for most people. Because then it's, you don't have the shroud, so it's not highly restrictive at track speeds. You actually drag reduction if you get rid of that fan shroud. And then when you pull in the pits, you got something. I mean, when you pull in, you're idling, you're cruising, your heat load on the car is negligible. And so, even the littlest of little fans, will keep things cool for you. And then obviously, as the air comes out of there, you need some louvers. Louvers got to be close to the radiator. And then there's like obstructions. Let's take, a Mustang, actually. A lot of cars will have like an overflow bottle that may be mounted to the top rear of the radiator. And so if you install hood louvers, right, and you got this big overflow bottle in the way, the air is going to be obstructed to some extent getting from the radiator to this hood vents. And so, relocating those things has a pretty good impact on functionality too. Cars where the motor is set back, so there's more room between the radiator and the engine. Or if the radiator is tilted forward, you gain more room. Basically, you don't want any obstructions or as little obstructions to airflow from the radiator to your hood vents as possible. Those are the general, basics. If you can manage those things, that's a pretty good start. As far as the grill blockers, that's yeah. So grill blockers will limit the amount of air that go into the front of the car. You may want to do that because you're at a track event and it's March, and maybe you don't want to install them because now it's August and it's blazing hot. So when you reduce the grill opening size, grill blockers, whatever you want to call them, essentially you limit the airflow that's going into the car. This limits cooling, but it reduces drag because you have less air going through the car, more air going around the car. And then there's a little bit of downforce to be gained with that. That's something you have to kind of experiment with or test with, like on those hot days in August. You're out the track, you're running your race car and track street car, whatever, and the thing's running really cold. You can just throw some masking tape on there or something, kind of start to make the hole in the nose smaller. Go out, drive it, come back in. At some point, the temps will come up to some place where you're happy or not happy. And then from there, you kind of have a rough idea of the physical hole opening size. And if you want to make some fancy plastic paneling to put in there as a permanent solution, you can do that. Or you could just stick with the tape. I don't know, NASCAR style, but that's generally what they do. Yeah.
Sweet. Do you have anything else that you wanted to share on your list that we didn't get to?
Let me take a look. Location, thermostats. No, I think we talked about quite a bit. I mean, there's obviously a lot of information. There's, you didn't hear it here. Go to our website. There's a lot of stuff on there.
RaceLouvers.com.
RaceLouvers.com.
Yeah. Where can they find you on Instagram?
Yeah, RaceLouvers on Instagram. Yeah, we have a Facebook page as well.
Okay.
Email and phone number on our website. We're pretty good with customer service. We definitely answer the phone. We definitely reply to emails, and usually within the same day. It's one thing that irritates me personally is when you're calling some company to buy some stuff and you leave a message or send an email and it just goes into oblivion. I hate that. Struggle. Anyways.
One personal question I have is, you have custom louvers set up on your website, priced from $200 to $800. I have no idea which one to select. Right. And I think the instructions say to call you guys anyway. So when you want a custom one, is it best to call?
Right. So we do custom louvers. You got some odd shape you want to do, different car, not factory hood, whatever. You're after a particular look. We definitely do custom louvers. And the way we do that is you send us an email, asking we do custom louvers, and then we'll ask you to, send us some pictures, some dimensions, all that fun stuff. And then from there, from dimensions, pictures, what you're looking for, from there we'll come up with a cost, and then at that point we will send you one of those product links. So those product links for custom louvers are just a vague mechanism for us to send you an order link. So if you come to us and I want a louver that's this, and this, and then we say, okay, that's going to be $399. Then we'll just send you the custom order link for $399. You click on it, you order it, and then we get to work. So they're kind of generic. Yeah.
I don't want to keep cutting up my hood. I'd like to either maximize the space between my pins or fit what's in there, but replace what I have with, in my opinion, what I feel is going to be more effective. So, because they're pretty short, again, it's more of a vent than it is a extractor, and I think I would need extraction. So, yeah, that was totally a personal question. So, whatever, we do it all the time on this podcast. So, I really appreciate you coming on, Albert. It was great to talk to you. I hope to meet you someday in person. Maybe we'll all be down at the A2 wind tunnel one day. But thanks for coming on the podcast, sir.
You are welcome. I appreciate the invite. And yeah, we go to A2 often, so we will probably eventually meet up at some point.
We'll definitely cross paths.
Until next time, keep working on yourself, keep working on the car, and let's get faster.